They say a house is built with wood and stone, but a home is built with love. It took me 20 years to build this home and only a few weeks for others to treat it as if it were theirs. The first light of dawn spills gently across the wooden floorboards. The old cedar walls glow a soft amber, and a faint chill lingers in the air. I sit by the wide window, my fingers wrapped around a porcelain teacup. Steam rises curling upward like whispers from another time. From this spot, I can see the garden my late husband and I once tended together. Each rosebush, each cluster of lavender, each stubborn patch of ivy, every corner of that garden carries a memory. His laughter as he planted the first sapling. The way his hands, strong yet careful, brushed the soil as though it were sacred. For us, it was never just a garden. It was a living memory book, blooming and fading with the seasons, reminding us of all we had built, all we had lost, and all we had promised each other. Sometimes, when the wind moves through the leaves, I swear I can still hear his voice. Not clear, not loud, but enough to remind me that I am not truly alone. That this home, though quieter now, still breathes with the life we once shared. I often wonder how to describe the feeling of living in a house you created with someone you loved more than life itself. It is not simply comfort. It is not merely shelter. It is a sanctuary, a witness to time, to joy, to grief. A place where every corner has absorbed laughter, arguments, reconciliations, and whispered dreams in the dark. When my son told me he was getting married, I cried tears I didn't expect. They weren't tears of sorrow, but of overwhelming joy. At that moment, I thought, finally this house will be whole again, filled with voices, with clinking glasses at dinner, with footsteps running down the hall. A new family to carry on what we started. I dreamed of the dining table, crowded with plates of my son's laughter, echoing alongside his wife's. Of perhaps, someday the innocent giggles of children who would call me grandmother. My heart swelled at the thought. I prepared myself for it. I polished the silverware that had gathered dust. I unfolded linens I had kept carefully wrapped for special occasions. I arranged fresh flowers in the vase my husband once gifted me. The house seemed to stir awake with me, as if it, too, was anticipating the new chapter about to begin. I thought of all the times I had sat alone by this very window, sipping my tea in silence. How different it would be to hear voices floating through the halls again. The thought carried me back to when my husband and I first moved here, two young souls with little money, but an abundance of hope. We hammered the beams ourselves, painted the walls with our own hands, and dreamed aloud about the life we would build inside. Every scratch on the floor, every faded mark on the wall has a story behind it. This home is not just mine. It is us. It is 20 years of shared life. And yet, even as I let hope fill me, I felt the faint echo of caution inside. Because I know one truth about life: every warm story begins with trust. But not every trust ends in warmth. Sometimes it ends when a boundary is crossed, when love is mistaken for weakness, when generosity is taken not as a gift, but as something to exploit. Still, I pushed that thought aside. Hope can be blinding, and I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe that my son's marriage would be a continuation of everything his father and I had built, not the unraveling of it. So I sat by the window that morning as the sky shifted from gray to gold. I held my teacup a little tighter, breathed in the scent of the garden roses, and whispered a silent promise: this house will remain a place of love. I didn't know then that my promise would be tested. That love, once so strong, would collide with entitlement and silence. That boundaries would blur and respect would falter. But every story must begin somewhere. And mine begins here on a quiet morning in the house of love. It all began with one simple request. "Mom," my son said one evening, his tone casual, almost playful, the way he used to ask me for sweets when he was a boy. "We just need to stay here for a few weeks. Our house is being renovated, and it will be easier if we're with you until it's finished." I smiled. My heart softened in an instant. How could I refuse him? Of course, I said, my voice warm, almost relieved. For years, I had dreamed of filling these empty rooms with life again. That night, I opened the guest bedroom windows, let the cool night air sweep through, and laid fresh sheets on the bed. I placed 2 extra pillows, smoothed the fabric until there was not a wrinkle in sight. I lit a small candle and set a vase of roses from the garden on the nightstand. My husband used to say that a home should always greet its guests with fragrance before words. The next day, I cooked stew the way my son liked when he was a child. The smell of simmering carrots, beef, and thyme filled the house. I baked bread and dusted it with flour, just as my husband once taught me. Setting the table, I imagined their faces, my son smiling, his wife laughing, the house buzzing with warmth. For 3 days, I lived in anticipation. Each morning, I polished a corner of the house. Each evening, I set aside small details that might make them feel welcome. The house itself seemed to awaken with me, walls breathing again, corridors waiting to echo with footsteps. Then on the 3rd day, I heard it, the deep growl of a moving truck outside. I stepped out, the sun sharp in my eyes, and watched men unload heavy furniture boxes stacked so high they nearly toppled. My heart sank. This was no temporary luggage. This was permanence. And then, as if in a silent procession, my daughter-in-law appeared, her heels clicking confidently on the stone path. Behind her were her parents. Not just visitors, but arrivals. Her mother's eyes scanned the porch, the hallway, the staircase that my husband once built with his own hands. She smiled, not the polite smile of a guest, but the satisfied smile of someone claiming something. "This place is so open, so bright," she said, stepping into the living room as if it had always been hers. She pointed at the guest room door. "This room here, it suits us perfectly." Her father nodded approvingly. Already his hands brushed against the walls as though assessing the quality, considering what could be changed. I froze at the staircase, my fingers wrapped tightly around the banister. I had to hold on, or I would lose my balance inside and out. Within hours, the invasion began. The kitchen, my sanctuary, was no longer mine. My spices were pushed aside, my pots rearranged. Suddenly, meals carried flavors I did not recognize. The fragrance of rosemary, basil, and thyme scents that once belonged to my husband's memory were replaced by something foreign, something that didn't feel like home. The living room, too, was transformed. My husband's armchair, the one he sat in every evening to read, was shoved into a corner. A new leather sofa appeared. My curtains, chosen carefully to soften the sunset light, were pulled down. New ones, bright, sharp, and personal, took their place. The walls, once covered in paper we had chosen together, were stripped and replaced with patterns that carried no history. I watched wordless as each part of my home was rewritten. The laughter in the living room was theirs, not mine. The rhythm of footsteps in the hallway no longer carried memory. It carried intrusion. I whispered to myself, the words catching in my throat. "I cannot believe it. They have just arrived, and already they act as though this house belongs to them." Tears burned behind my eyes. I did not let them fall. Instead, I pressed a hand to my chest, took one long, steady breath, and chose silence. But silence was not surrender. That evening, I pulled from my drawer a leather-bound notebook. Its pages were blank, untouched for years. I had kept it waiting for something worth recording. Now I realized it was time. I opened to the first page and wrote Day 1. The truck arrived. They carried not just boxes, but a sense of ownership. Every detail I recorded. The words her mother spoke. The rearrangement of my kitchen. The new sofa that replaced the chair where my husband's spirit lingered. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wished harm, but because when kindness is mistaken for weakness, when hospitality is exploited, one must bear witness. If not for others, then for oneself. The notebook became my anchor. Every time I wanted to shout, to reclaim, to demand respect, I wrote instead. Late at night in the attic room, they moved me to, for convenience, I scribbled by lamplight. My handwriting trembled, but the words were steady. When a guest behaves as an owner, the host must remember who truly holds the keys. During the day, when their laughter rose from the living room, where my memories once lived, I wrote again, "Joy without respect is noise. Love without boundaries is theft." Each page gave me strength, not in anger, but in clarity, because I began to see what they did not, that they were not building a home, they were dismantling one. Piece by piece, they were erasing what 20 years of love had created. And yet I remained quiet. Not because I was blind, not because I was weak, but because silence recorded carefully becomes evidence. I understood then this was not about a temporary stay. This was about testing the very limits of respect of family of love. I had welcomed them with open arms. And in return, they stretched their arms wider, reaching for what was never theirs to claim. But I had my notebook. And as I wrote page after page, I whispered to myself, "They believe I will not resist. They are wrong. I am only waiting." At first, it was the kitchen. One morning, I rose early, as I always had, and walked down the familiar staircase with the quiet eagerness of routine. For decades, that room had been my sanctuary, the place where warmth began, where the day unfolded with the scent of bread and the gentle hiss of boiling tea. I reached for the cupboard where my spices were always kept: garlic, thyme, rosemary, pepper. But my hand stopped. The jars were gone. The shelves had been rearranged. In their place stood tall bottles of sauces, powders, and pastes. I barely recognized labels written in languages foreign to me. My modest jars had been pushed to the back, buried as though they were no longer welcome. The meals that emerged from my stove no longer bore the taste of my hand. They followed someone else's rhythm, someone else's demands. Recipes passed down from my grandmother's soups simmered until the flavors sang. Bread kneaded with patience had vanished, replaced by quick dishes and unfamiliar spices. I sat at the table, eating food that did not taste of home, feeling the ache of absence with every bite. The irony cut deep. I was a guest at the table I had once ruled. Then came the walls. Above the mantel once hung a photograph of my husband, his kind eyes, his steady smile. That frame had been the center of the living room, the silent guardian of every family gathering. One morning it was gone, removed without word or notice. In its place, a new painting appeared, an abstract landscape, cool colors swirling without warmth, without history. I stared at it for a long time, my hand pressed against the wall, as though the paint might dissolve and give me back his face. It wasn't simply decoration that had been altered. It was memory, love, years of devotion, erased with a nail and a hammer. Then they came for my room. "My things would be safer here, Mama," my daughter-in-law said brightly, almost dismissively. "The attic is tidy. It makes sense for you to move upstairs for convenience." Convenience. A word as sharp as broken glass. My bedroom, the space where my husband and I had whispered secrets, argued, reconciled, dreamed, was emptied. My belongings carried up narrow stairs into a room that had never been meant for living. The attic smelled of dust and cedar. Its walls leaned in, pressing close, the slanted ceiling making it hard to stand upright. The single window looked out onto the roof tiles, not the garden. The air was stale, heavy, absent of life. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, my suitcase by my feet, and listened. From below came laughter, clinking glasses, voices that blended with music. They were living in my house as though it had always belonged to them, while I was hidden away, tucked into corners, erased from the story I had written with my life. One evening, descending quietly to fetch a book, I paused on the stairs. My daughter-in-law's voice floated up, casual but cruel. "These days, who lets the elderly make decisions? It's not their time anymore." The words struck me like ice water poured over the heart. For a moment, anger flared, sharp, uncontrollable. My fingers tightened on the railing. I wanted to shout, to remind her whose name was carved on the deed, whose sweat and years had built the walls around her. But I did not. I turned step by step and returned to the attic. I opened my notebook, the same one that had carried my recipes, my thoughts, my hopes. My pen moved slowly, but my hand was steady as I wrote, "When kindness is mistaken for weakness, do not be angry, prepare." The ink bled into the page like a promise. Each evening thereafter, I wrote. Not complaints, not bitterness, but observations, quiet lines of truth. The world below me thought I was silent, but my silence had shape. It was gathering strength. And then one night, I did what I had not done in years. I opened the drawer of my bedside table, the drawer where memory and foresight met. Slowly, carefully, I withdrew a bundle of papers still protected in their sleeves. The deed to the house, the purchase contract, certificates of ownership, sealed and signed proof more enduring than words. I spread them on the bed, the lamplight glinting on the ink. My fingers traced the lines, the signatures, the stamps. Each one whispered the same truth: this house was mine. Not theirs, not borrowed, not shared, mine. They could rearrange my shelves. They could strip my walls. They could push me into the attic half, in the dining room, and speak as though I were invisible. But paper has a memory sharper than human pride. The law did not care for laughter. The law did not bend to arrogance. I folded the documents gently, placed them back in their sleeves, and returned them to the drawer. The sound of the wood sliding shut was quiet, almost delicate. But to me, it thundered like a drumbeat. They wanted to claim. I chose to prepare. That night, lying in the narrow attic bed, I stared at the ceiling and whispered into the darkness. They think the boundaries have blurred. They think I have surrendered. But soon, they will see where the lines truly are. And in that whisper, I did not hear defeat. I heard the beginning of something else, the slow, patient rising of a tide. Morning came softly, with the kind of light that doesn't shout, but touches everything, as if it's grateful to be allowed in. I arrived early at the lab, the halls still and bright, the glass panels holding the sky the way a careful hand holds water. Emily was already there, sleeves pushed up, hair in a loose knot, eyes clear, the way only purpose can polish a person's gaze. She didn't notice me at first. She was staring at the console, listening to the simulated heartbeat of a patient halfway across the country, mapping the variations like a cartographer, tracing the edges of a land no one has walked yet. When she finally turned, her smile arrived before her words. "You're early," she said. "So are you," I answered. And for a moment, we were simply two women in a room made for questions, grateful that this morning the answers felt close. We spent the hours like that quiet collaboration, the kind that doesn't need applause to feel real. The prototype wasn't a dream anymore. It was a discipline. It had learned to listen to translate the rumor of danger into a clear early warning. Once I believed intelligence was the crown of invention. Now I know it is humility the device works, not because it is brilliant, but because it never assumes it knows more than the heart. It listens first. It listens always. By noon, the team gathered. Data unfolded in careful layers, false positives, declining detection windows, growing wider power consumption, trimmed like a garden kept by steady hands. We argued about a threshold, the smallest difference between signal and noise. Emily argued for caution and won. "We are not selling fear," she said. "We are selling time." The room was quiet after that. Not because there was nothing to say, but because she had said what mattered. Bonne tuve. In the afternoon, a call came from Washington. I kept it on speaker because this was no longer my story alone. The voice on the other end was warm but official, the cadence of someone who gives out money for a living and knows what money is supposed to do. The government would support a national pilot. $10 million, phased contingent on outcomes. I thought of all the things people buy with $10 million, and then I thought of a single child whose mother lives because a device whispered at the right time, and I realized again how cheap and how priceless money can be, depending on what it touches. When the call ended, we didn't cheer. We breathed. Sometimes, relief is louder than celebration. A week later, letters began to arrive. They came in ordinary envelopes, the handwriting careful and unpracticed. A boy in Kansas whose father fainted mowing the lawn. An alert, sounded, the ambulance came, and a widow did not have to learn how to wear the word widow. A teacher in Maine who never felt a symptom until a silent rhythm turned reckless. The device caught it, 12 hours before her heart tried to leave her. They didn't write to praise us. They wrote to say, "We are still here. You cannot frame that on a wall. You can only keep working." I kept waiting for the grief to finish its slow work in me. I had forgiven my daughter, and yet forgiveness, I learned, is not a door you walk through once. It is a hallway you travel every day. Some mornings the light at the end looks close. Some evenings it looks like a rumor. On a gray Thursday, I asked Emily if she would come with me to the prison. She nodded, as if I had invited her to a place we both belonged. The room where visitors sit is designed to remind you that time is a law, not a suggestion. Fluorescent lights make every face a confession. When Victoria walked in, I saw the woman who had tried to become someone else and failed. And inside her, I saw the girl who used to kick off her shoes by my office door and ask if Code had a bedtime. She sat down carefully, like a person trying not to wake a sleeping animal. We looked at each other for a long moment that held a decade. I started a reading group, she said, not as an offering, but as a truth that had survived her. Medical articles mostly. Some women want novels, but I need to learn. She did not drive them away. There was no shouting, no storm of accusations. Instead, she acted with quiet certainty. Her hands moved calmly, gathering her belongings one by one. A few carefully chosen sets of clothes, folded with precision, as though she were preparing for a journey. The family album, its pages heavy with the weight of decades, with every photograph carrying laughter, tears, and memories that could not be replaced. And finally, the most important item of all, the ownership document, the paper that bore her name, and reminded everyone that this house had once been built not from greed, but from love, sacrifice, and relentless dedication. She stood in the center of the room for a moment, looking around at the walls that had witnessed so much of her life. The air carried both warmth and bitterness. Once this had been a sanctuary where meals were shared and voices overlapped in joy. Now it had become a battleground of silence and unspoken resentment. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. This house was once built with love. She whispered, her voice almost inaudible. And today, I leave it with peace. The words did not sound like surrender. They sounded like liberation. Outside, the rumble of a taxi engine drifted in from the gate. She lifted her small suitcase with one hand, while with the other, she pressed the album tightly against her chest. The driver stepped forward to help, but she shook her head. She wanted to carry her own things. They were not heavy in weight, but they carried the significance of a lifetime. Her son stood in the doorway, watching his body frozen with indecision. His eyes followed her every move. In his gaze, there was guilt, hesitation, and a flicker of longing to say something more. His lips trembled, and finally he spoke. "Mother, one day I will understand. I will understand why you chose to leave instead of staying. Why you walked away rather than fight for what is already yours." She paused at the gate, turned slightly, and let her eyes rest on him. There was no anger there, no blame, only a calm wisdom that came from years of endurance. "You will understand," she said softly. "Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day you will see why dignity is worth more than possession, why peace is stronger than conflict, and why silence, when chosen, can teach louder than words ever could." Her voice carried the weight of both love and disappointment. It was not a scolding, but a lesson offered at the edge of departure. The iron gate creaked as she pulled it shut behind her. The sound was sharp, final, like the closing of a chapter. It was the sound of boundaries being drawn, of lessons being etched into memory. The taxi door closed with a soft thud. As the car pulled away, she looked out the window at the fading outline of the house. She did not cry. Instead, she allowed herself a long, steady breath, as if each inhale drew strength, and each exhale released years of unspoken weight. That house, once vibrant, had become heavy with silence. Silence from her son when he should have spoken. Silence from herself when she had chosen patience over confrontation. And now silence again, but this time it was not weakness. It was strength. On the seat beside her lay the album. She opened it gently, the pages crackling with age. The first photograph showed her younger self standing proudly in front of the newly built house. Her smile then was wide, full of hope, her arms wrapped around her son as a child. She turned more pages, each filled with birthdays, holidays, and simple moments that had once defined happiness. They can keep the house, she thought to herself. But they cannot keep my memories. They cannot keep my dignity. Behind her, within the closed gate, silence lingered in the courtyard. Her son remained standing, watching the taxi shrink into the distance. His wife shifted uneasily beside him, her eyes darting away, her heart unsettled. For even though Margaret had left, it did not feel like victory. It felt like loss, a loss they could not yet name. Because Margaret's choice to leave was not a defeat. It was a declaration. By walking away, she had made her statement without raising her voice. She had shown them that possessions mean little when respect is gone, that sometimes leaving teaches more than staying. Every brick of that house, every nail, every window pane had been built from her devotion. Yet she left it behind willingly, because she understood something they did not. Walls and roofs do not make a home. Respect, love, and loyalty do. And so the story did not end with a battle won or lost. It ended with the quiet triumph of a woman who chose herself, who chose to guard her dignity above all else. The gate had closed, but the lesson had just begun. The day came quietly without warning, yet with the inevitability of a tide returning to shore. A black sedan glided down the narrow street and stopped before the house Margaret had built with her own hands. Men in neat suits emerged, carrying folders, papers, and the calm authority of an institution that operated only in facts and numbers. Their eyes scanned the house, not with curiosity, not with malice, but with the impartiality of bankers who had long grown used to disputes over ownership. They knocked, and when the door opened, they presented the documents. Margaret stood calmly, holding the weight of her decisions, lightly knowing that the truth had always been on her side. The papers confirmed what she had long known: the name on the title deed belonged to her. She was the legal owner. She had poured 2 decades into this house building, not only walls, but memories, a life, and a legacy. And now, that law recognized it plainly. Those who had tried to claim the house, the daughter-in-law, her parents, and even the hesitant son, were left speechless. Without Margaret's signature, they could not take a loan mortgage the property or transfer ownership. All their schemes, all their assertions that the house now belonged to them, collapsed under the weight of the law. They had attempted to rewrite reality with arrogance and greed, but the truth could not be forged by wishes or entitlement. Outside the neighborhood began to notice subtle shifts. Neighbors who had once greeted them warmly now glanced away. Gossip traveled quickly. Whispers carried the story of a family attempting to seize their mother's home, of people who had misjudged both age and wisdom. Margaret, as always, remained composed. Her life continued quietly, as it always had, while the others now faced the consequences of their choices. Inside the house, chaos took hold. Without Margaret's guidance, and without the authority she naturally commanded, every minor disagreement became amplified. Disputes over bills, groceries, and household chores turned into shouting matches. The daughter-in-law's voice was sharp, full of frustration. Her parents argued over trivial matters. And the son, paralyzed by regret, wandered from room to room, haunted by the realization that he had allowed his own family to spiral into conflict. The home that had once been a place of warmth now radiated tension, echoing with unresolved anger and disappointment. Inevitably, their unity crumbled. The daughter-in-law packed her belongings one evening, huffing in frustration, while her parents followed silently, unable or unwilling to face the truth of their failure. They left in haste, abandoning not only the house, but the illusion of control and power they had once believed they possessed. Greed which had temporarily united them, had now consumed them, leaving only emptiness behind. And so the son remained, alone, surrounded by the very walls he had sought to claim, yet devoid of companionship, respect, or authority. The rooms were vast and echoing. The garden, once nurtured and vibrant, had begun to wilt, neglected, without the steady hand of Margaret. Every corner of the house reminded him of the opportunities he had squandered, the love he had failed to honor, and the wisdom he had ignored. It was in this state of solitude that he realized the magnitude of his mistakes. He had believed he could seize what was not his, that ambition and convenience could replace care and responsibility. And now, confronted by the emptiness of both the house and his conscience, he understood that possession meant nothing without integrity, and ownership was hollow without respect. Finally, he went to find Margaret. He traced her to the small, serene apartment she had rented after leaving her home. It was modest, far removed from the grandeur and history of the house, yet it radiated calm and order. On the table sat her teacup, steam rising in gentle curls, as if time itself had slowed to honor her quiet presence. He entered, hesitant guilt written across his face. "Mother," he said, his voice faltering, "I am sorry. I have lost everything." The words were heavy, carrying the weight of failure, regret, and self-reproach. But Margaret did not answer with anger, nor did she scold him. She simply regarded him calmly, her eyes steady, filled with both wisdom and compassion. The silence stretched long enough for him to feel every second each heartbeat echoing the depth of his misjudgment. Then she spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "No, my son, you have not lost everything. You have lost illusions, the false sense of security given by greed, the convenience of silence when words should have been spoken, the company of those who only stood by for selfish reasons. What you face now is the opportunity to begin anew, to rebuild your understanding of respect, responsibility, and love." She placed her hand over the table, touching the deed that still bore her name. Its presence was a quiet reminder of what had been achieved through patience, diligence, and care. "You are only beginning," she continued, "to learn the most important lesson, how to keep what belongs to you, not by force, not by entitlement, but through respect for others, for yourself, and for what has been built, with love and integrity." He lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes, overwhelmed by the realization that her departure had not been a surrender, but a demonstration of power tempered by wisdom. The peace she carried was not passive. It was a force stronger than anger, stronger than confrontation. It was a lesson in dignity, an education in restraint, and in the value of honor. Outside the house remained. Its walls held the echoes of laughter, arguments, celebrations, and silence alike. It was still Margaret's legally and morally, but the son knew that possession alone could not restore what had been broken. The true inheritance, the knowledge she had imparted, was far more valuable than any physical structure. He understood now the consequences of greed were not merely financial or legal. They were emotional, relational, and spiritual. He had chased what he believed was rightfully his only, to find that in doing so, he had emptied the house of its warmth, destroyed bonds of trust, and severed the connection between generations. Margaret's eyes softened, and she placed her hand on his shoulder. "Remember this. My son, respect is the foundation of everything. When you understand that you will never be empty again, no matter what is taken from you. What is taken from greed is lost, but what is held through respect endures." And in that moment, he realized that he was not without hope. This was the start of a new chapter, a chance to relearn how to value people over possessions, wisdom over impulsiveness, and love over entitlement. Margaret smiled gently, a smile full of quiet power. "You see, my son," she said, "you have not truly lost. You are simply beginning to learn what I have always known, how to hold on to what is yours, with care, honor, and dignity." The son nodded slowly, tears forming in his eyes, not of sorrow alone, but of understanding. He finally saw that the house, the walls, the rooms, they were secondary. What mattered most was the lesson his mother had lived, the respect she demanded, and the strength she had modeled. It was a painful, humbling realization, but it was also a beginning. And for the first time since the disputes began, the son felt a quiet resolve growing within him, a determination to rebuild his life, not on greed or manipulation, but on the principles his mother had embodied all along. After the dust of conflict had settled and the lessons of the house had been learned, Margaret found herself standing at a new beginning. She did not dwell on the past grievances or the greed that had once threatened to overwhelm her life. Instead, she turned her attention outward to others who might face similar struggles, particularly the elderly, who like her had given their lives to families, communities, and work only to be disregarded when they needed protection and guidance the most. With calm determination, Margaret decided to open a free legal counseling class for senior citizens. Every week, she welcomed elderly men and women into a small, sunlit room she rented in the center of town. The walls were lined with books, law manuals, notepads, filled with her own annotations and pamphlets explaining rights and property laws in clear, simple terms. She wanted her audience to feel empowered to understand that the law could protect them if they had the knowledge and courage to use it. Her classes quickly gained attention. Word of Margaret's initiative spread across social media. Videos of her teaching seniors about property rights, guardianship laws, and legal contracts were shared thousands of times. Viewers commented on her calm, unwavering demeanor and her practical approach. The story of the woman who had lost none of her dignity and had handled an attempted family takeover with poise and intelligence resonated widely. Journalists came knocking, eager to hear from her directly. A young reporter asked during one interview, "How did you remain so calm when your own family tried to take everything from you?" Margaret smiled gently, the kind of smile that conveyed both wisdom and humility. "Peace is the smartest revenge," she said simply. Her words carried weight because they were true, not theoretical. She had proven that action taken with clarity, patience, and respect could be far more powerful than anger or retaliation. Viewers flooded the comment sections online. The mother handled everything so calmly. That's real strength. Using the contract instead of anger was such a smart move. I wish my parents had her wisdom. I am learning so much just from watching her story. Margaret would read these comments with quiet satisfaction, not from pride, but from the knowledge that her experience was helping others. Each smile she received, each message of gratitude, each story shared by someone who had reclaimed their rights because of her guidance reaffirmed her purpose. She often paused during lessons to tell her students about the moment she had placed the contract for the rental agreement on the table, calm as ever, while her daughter-in-law and in-laws stared at her in disbelief. She described the mixture of surprise, confusion, and silent acknowledgement that had passed over their faces the exact moment when authority replaced chaos and reason replaced anger. Students listened intently, some nodding, others jotting down notes. Margaret never portrayed herself as heroic. She often reminded them, "I did what anyone could have done if they only had the knowledge and courage." The difference is understanding your rights and holding on to them without losing your peace in the process. Her teachings extended beyond legal advice. She emphasized patience, self-respect, and emotional intelligence. She explained that the strength of the mind and heart often outweighed the power of force or confrontation. Through storytelling, she illustrated how calm decision-making and strategic use of the law could prevent unnecessary conflict and protect what was truly valuable. The news outlets, impressed by her approach, invited her for interviews, podcasts, and television segments. In every instance, she remained composed, delivering her message clearly. Peace is not passivity. It is strategy. It is dignity in action. And when you wield it correctly, it becomes the most powerful tool you have. Her story inspired a ripple effect. Families began discussing property and legal matters more openly. Seniors reported feeling more confident in asserting their rights. Some even came back weeks later, sharing personal victories, how they had resolved disputes without confrontation, how they had drafted simple contracts to protect their homes, or how they had spoken calmly but firmly when family members overstepped. Margaret would listen quietly, her eyes reflecting both pride and the weight of experience. She knew that her journey had been difficult, that her calm had been forged in fire, but she also understood that the lessons she shared now were more valuable than anything she could have gained from revenge or argument. During quieter moments when the lessons ended and the students had left, she would sit by her window with a cup of tea, reflecting on the journey she had walked. She remembered the house, the arguments, the betrayal, and the moment she had chosen law over rage. She smiled softly. Not because she had triumphed over others, but because she had remained true to herself, teaching a wider audience the same principle that calm dignity and legal awareness could overcome the chaos of greed. Occasionally, she would add a personal note during class. I only did what my husband would have been proud of. He always believed in integrity, in careful action, and in the power of peace. I honor his memory by continuing what he valued, helping others, guiding them, and showing that justice can be firm without being cruel. Her students, young and old alike, often remarked that listening to her felt like sitting with a grandmother who not only understood life, but had mastered it. They admired the blend of humility and authority, the combination of lived experience and practical teaching. Margaret knew that the journey she had embarked upon was larger than herself. It was about transforming experiences into guidance, turning personal trials into lessons that could protect and empower others. It was about showing that wisdom, not anger, creates lasting impact. And so, as the world took notice through social media, shares, viral videos, and heartfelt interviews, Margaret's voice became a beacon for those navigating their own difficult family or legal challenges. Peace is the smartest revenge, she repeated time and time again. And in living her own life by that principle, she proved it true. Through her actions, her teachings, and her calm resilience, Margaret reminded everyone that true power comes not from aggression or loud confrontations, but from knowledge, strategy, and dignity. She had turned betrayal into a lesson, conflict into education, and anger into peace. And for Margaret, this new journey, guiding others, sharing wisdom, and living with purpose, was the most profound chapter yet. She had faced greed and deceit, yet emerged not broken, but whole, not vengeful, but wise, teaching the world that the smartest revenge is not fury, but serenity applied with intelligence and care. 1 year had passed since Margaret had left her beloved home, carrying with her only a few belongings, a photo album, and the precious deed that proved her ownership. The house had been left behind in silence, a silent witness to the lessons, the conflicts, and the courage that had played out within its walls. Now, after 12 months of absence, Margaret decided it was time to return. She approached the familiar path, the gravel crunching softly under her shoes. The wooden gate, slightly weathered, swung open with a familiar creak, as if acknowledging her presence. The house stood quietly, dust settling upon the windowsills, cobwebs clinging to corners, and the garden wild and untamed. Grass grew tall, flowers had withered, and the once meticulous paths were now lined with scattered leaves. But beneath the layer of neglect, the soul of the house remained intact, as if it had been waiting patiently for her return. Margaret paused at the threshold, taking a deep breath. She remembered every step, every corner, every room filled with memories of laughter, love, and even heartbreak. She placed her hand on the doorknob, feeling the cool metal under her fingers. As she turned it, the door opened smoothly, letting in a cascade of morning light. Sunbeams filtered through the dusty windows, illuminating the familiar shapes of the furniture and the walls she had decorated so carefully. Inside the house was silent, almost reverent in its stillness. Dust motes danced in the sunlight like tiny golden specks, and the air carried a faint scent of aged wood and memories. Margaret's eyes were drawn to the living room table where a cracked teacup still sat, as if waiting for her to return. She smiled softly. The cup, fragile and imperfect, symbolized resilience, the same resilience she had learned to cultivate in herself over the past year. Walking through the rooms, Margaret ran her fingers lightly over the surfaces, brushing away the layers of dust. She did not feel anger or sadness for what had passed. Instead, a sense of calm and purpose filled her. This house, built with love and perseverance, was not merely a structure of wood and nails. It was a reflection of her life, a repository of lessons learned, and a testament to patience, dignity, and the quiet power of standing firm in the face of injustice. She paused at the window overlooking the garden. The wild grass swayed gently in the breeze, and the flowers, though untended, still held a stubborn beauty. Margaret knelt briefly and ran her hand along the soil, remembering how she and her late husband had planted each bloom together. Each plant was a memory, each root a reminder of care and devotion. Even in the absence of regular tending, life had continued, and now as she returned, she saw an opportunity for renewal, not through destruction, but through gentle restoration. At that moment, her son appeared at the front gate, carrying a bouquet of freshly picked flowers. His expression was a mixture of anticipation, relief, and humility. He had witnessed the strength and wisdom his mother had displayed over the past year, and now he sought to welcome her home, not only physically, but symbolically. "Mother," he said softly, extending the flowers toward her, "come home." Margaret accepted the flowers, her fingers brushing his, a gesture filled with unspoken understanding and forgiveness. She looked around the room once more, letting the familiar warmth of the house envelop her. She placed the bouquet carefully on the table beside the cracked teacup. "This house," she said, her voice calm and steady, "is not just a place to live. It is a lesson." Her son nodded, understanding the depth of her words. The house had witnessed greed, silence, confrontation, and resilience. It had taught boundaries, respect, and the enduring strength of integrity. And now, as they stood together in the quiet, Margaret knew that the true value of the home was not in the walls or the furniture, but in the wisdom it had imparted to both of them. Margaret walked slowly through the house, opening drawers, straightening chairs, and wiping away the dust. She did not hurry. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture a meditation. She reminded herself that beginnings did not require destruction. Renewal could come from acknowledgement, care, and the simple act of remembering one's own strength and identity. "Do not tear it down to start anew," she whispered to herself, echoing the lesson she had learned the hard way. "Just wipe away the dust and remember who you are." Her son, observing her, felt a profound respect for the woman who had taught him more through action than words ever could. The flowers he had brought now rested beside the teacup, a small symbol of reconciliation, of growth, and of a life rebuilt with understanding. Together, they moved through the house in silence, not out of awkwardness, but out of reverence. The walls, the windows, the familiar corners, they all seemed to breathe with the history of their shared experiences. Margaret understood, as she had all along, that the essence of a home was not in its appearance, but in the memories, the lessons, and the love that had been poured into it. Finally, she paused at the doorway leading to the garden. The sun was higher now, casting a golden glow across the untamed grass. She breathed in deeply, savoring the fresh air and the quiet strength that surrounded her. The garden would need care, yes, but it could be restored gently, just as she and her son could restore their connection and their understanding. Her son spoke again, this time with a more certain tone. "Mother, come back. Let us rebuild together." Margaret smiled a serene, knowing smile. "A house is not merely a place to live," she said. "It is a teacher. It shows us who we are, what we can endure, and how we can grow." And in that moment, standing in the house she had built, surrounded by the traces of memory and the promise of renewal, Margaret realized that home was not just a physical space. Home was a reflection of wisdom, dignity, and the courage to face life with calm and clarity. She placed her hand on the teacup, gently cracked but enduring, and looked out at the garden, knowing that restoration was not measured by force or haste, but by patience, care, and the quiet strength of living with intention. The sunlight poured gently through the window, illuminating Margaret's silver hair and casting long, warm shadows across the room. She sat quietly, her hands folded loosely in her lap, eyes resting on the familiar garden outside, now vibrant and cared for again. The house had become a sanctuary of reflection, not just a building of wood and stone, but a testament to the journey she had walked, the lessons she had endured, and the wisdom she had cultivated over decades. Her voice, calm, deep, and measured, broke the silence as she began to speak, not aloud to anyone in particular, but as if narrating the story of life itself. "I have not defeated anyone," she said softly. "I only ensured that no one could defeat me through injustice." Her words lingered in the air, carrying the weight of experience. Each sentence was layered with the countless moments of patience, quiet, resilience, and deliberate action she had taken throughout the trials of the past year. She had faced betrayal, greed, and disrespect, yet she had chosen a path that relied on clarity, law, and the quiet power of self-respect. She had not raised her voice, nor had she wielded anger as a weapon. Instead, she had relied on principles, on patience, and on the subtle, enduring force of dignity. Margaret's eyes wandered over the garden where her hands had once planted flowers alongside her late husband. The vibrant colors now symbolized more than beauty. They were living reminders of persistence and care. Boundaries, she continued, are the fences of love. When those boundaries are crossed, your freedom disappears, replaced only by regret. She paused, letting the words settle. She recalled the moments when her family had failed to respect her home, her choices, and her life. She remembered the tension in the living room, the quiet confrontation with her son, the astonishment on the faces of her daughter-in-law and her in-laws when she had placed the rental agreement calmly on the table. Every action she had taken was deliberate, every choice measured. And now, in the soft afternoon light, it all crystallized into a single truth. One does not need to fight with fists or anger to reclaim respect. Peace, wielded wisely, is far more powerful. Sometimes, Margaret thought revenge is not measured in retaliation or destruction. It is measured in the quiet assurance that one has remained true to oneself. Sometimes, she said, letting a faint smile touch her lips, the best revenge is to live in such peace that there is nothing left for them to take. The memory of the past months, the departure, the legal battles, the solitude her son had faced, and the eventual restoration of order was vivid, yet no longer painful. Each experience had been a teacher, every challenge a guide. Margaret reflected on the transformation she had witnessed, not only in her home, but in herself and her son. He had learned through observation, through humility, and through her example, the value of integrity, the importance of boundaries, and the power of calm determination. She rose from the chair and walked slowly to the window, feeling the warmth of the sun against her face. The garden below shimmered with life, and the house, though aged, radiated a quiet dignity. This was more than a home. It was a living testament to what patience, courage, and principled action could achieve. She could have chosen anger, bitterness, or confrontation, but she had chosen wisdom and peace instead. Turning back to her journal, she wrote down her reflections. Each word was deliberate, each sentence a crystallization of the lessons she had learned and the truths she wished to share with others. She wrote about boundaries, respect, patience, in the subtle, enduring power of calmness in the face of injustice. She wrote about the importance of teaching these lessons to those who would follow, to family, friends, and anyone who might find themselves facing similar trials. Margaret leaned back in her chair, looking toward the horizon, where the sunlight touched every corner of the garden. She envisioned the countless seniors who would attend her legal counseling classes, the messages from people she had helped, and the ripple effect her actions had created online. Her journey had begun with a home, a family dispute, and a challenge to her authority and dignity. Yet it had grown into a broader mission, empowering others, demonstrating wisdom and proving that strength does not always roar. It often whispers patiently, insistently, wisely. Her voice, almost a whisper, now resonated with authority, born from experience. Remember, peace is not weakness. It is the most powerful form of strength you can wield. It protects, it teaches, and it restores. And when lived fully, it ensures that no injustice can truly take hold of your life. She turned to the camera, the lens capturing not just an image, but the essence of a life guided by principle, patience, and wisdom. "Comment peace," she said with a serene smile. "If you believe that calm and dignity can also be powerful." And follow, she continued, her tone gentle yet persuasive. To hear more stories where mothers, elders, and those who have faced adversity teach us life lessons through intellect, courage, and heart. Margaret returned her gaze to the window, sunlight tracing the silver threads of her hair. She felt a profound sense of closure, not because battles had been won in the conventional sense, but because she had remained whole, intact, and true to herself. The house, the family, the challenges, they were all chapters in a story of resilience and wisdom, and she had authored them with the steady hand of experience and love. No one had been defeated. No one had triumphed through cruelty or greed. And yet through calm, deliberate, and principled action, Margaret had achieved something far more enduring than victory over others. She had preserved her dignity, her peace, and her self-respect. And in doing so, she had taught the world in word and deed that true strength is quiet, patient, and unyielding in its wisdom.